In the late 1950s, Los Angeles was a city that glittered like no other. The movie premieres were grander, the parties were wilder, and the celebrities seemed untouchable. On certain weekends, one event outshone them all, the charity casino nights. These weren't the smoky backroom poker games of crime films. No, these were lavish affairs held in glamorous ballrooms, complete with crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and red carpet entrances. Paparazzi would snap photos of Hollywood's brightest stars, draped in diamonds and tuxedos, smiling as they posed beside roulette tables and stacks of colorful chips. The public loved them. The papers ran glowing coverage the next day, highlighting which A-lister donated the most, who won big at blackjack, and, most importantly, how much money was raised for a good cause. The perception was simple. This was charity wrapped in Hollywood style. But beneath the glittering exterior was a truth as dark as the suits worn by the men who controlled it. Behind the scenes, not every smiling face was there for philanthropy. For the organized crime families operating out of Las Vegas and Chicago, these events were more than social gatherings. They were pipelines for money laundering on a scale that few could comprehend. The very same roulette wheels that spun under crystal chandeliers were spinning fortunes clean. The stars on stage weren't just entertaining the crowd. They were providing cover, knowingly or not, for a con that fooled not just Hollywood, but the entire city. And while the night might have ended with champagne toasts and applause for the charitable work done, in the counting rooms backstage, the real transactions were taking place. Transactions that would set in motion one of the boldest scams in Hollywood history. By the early 1960s, charity casinos weren't just a novelty, they were the talk of the town. Every major social calendar in Los Angeles seemed to have one circled in red ink. The setup was irresistible. A glamorous venue, free-flowing drinks, celebrity hosts, and the promise that every bet placed was for a noble cause. Movie studios quietly encouraged their stars to attend, knowing that a few well-placed photographs of them mingling at a blackjack table would generate good publicity. The events often carried grand, heartfelt names: Cards for Cancer, Roulette for Relief, Hollywood's Night of Giving. Tickets were pricey, sometimes equivalent to hundreds of dollars today, but they sold out quickly. Everyone wanted to rub shoulders with the stars, sip champagne under chandeliers, and pretend for one night that they were part of the same gilded world. But the more popular these events became, the more opportunity they created for the mob. The scheme was simple, yet brilliant. Casino nights were technically illegal in California, unless the proceeds went to charity. Mob-backed foundations swooped in to fill that gap, presenting themselves as legitimate nonprofits while being little more than shell organizations. They'd rent out swanky hotels or old ballrooms, hire a few well-dressed dealers, and make sure to have a couple of friendly faces from the entertainment world on the invite list. Money would pour in, cash from ticket sales, donations made during the night, and of course the chips bought for gaming. On paper, it all looked clean. The foundations would report modest earnings to the state and claim the rest went toward operating costs or future charitable projects. In reality, a massive percentage of the cash was siphoned straight into mob-controlled accounts, eventually funneled into Las Vegas casinos, real estate deals, or other underworld ventures. What made the scam so effective was the veneer of legitimacy. The smiling photographs of celebrities dropping chips onto the table, the breathless society columns praising the generosity of Hollywood, the sealed envelopes handed to charity representatives at the end of the night. It was all part of a carefully choreographed illusion. And as long as the parties kept getting bigger and the papers kept printing glowing reviews, no one dared to look behind the curtain. The charity casino scam might have been born out of Las Vegas playbooks, but its success in Hollywood was no accident. The mob had been quietly building influence in the entertainment industry for decades, weaving themselves into its social, financial, and even creative fabric. By the time charity casinos exploded in popularity, they already had the perfect network in place to exploit them. Hollywood in the 1950s and 60s wasn't just a hub for movies. It was a meeting ground for power brokers of every stripe. Studio heads, record label executives, talent agents, and nightclub owners all mingled in the same circles, and many had quiet arrangements with organized crime. Whether it was for labor peace, financing for risky productions, or access to certain exclusive night spots, deals were made in smoky back rooms and over lavish dinners. The charity casino nights offered mobsters a golden opportunity to mingle with the upper crust without raising suspicion. The events were public, legitimate on paper, and draped in the glamour of Hollywood. It wasn't unusual to see a powerful studio executive sitting at a craps table next to a man whose name never appeared in the credits, but was whispered in every corner booth from Beverly Hills to the Vegas Strip. Certain high-profile celebrities became unwitting and sometimes willing ambassadors for these events. A smiling photo op with a well-known actor or singer was worth more than any advertisement. It sent the message that the night was safe, respectable, and even fashionable. Behind the scenes, mob lieutenants ensured that big-name attendees were taken care of, chauffeured to the venue, given prime seats, and offered play money in the form of complimentary chips. Anything to keep them in the public eye and near the tables. The infiltration didn't stop at parties. Mob money occasionally made its way into film financing, particularly in productions that were risky or had trouble securing studio backing. These investments came with strings attached, promises to use certain vendors, to shoot in mob-friendly locations, or to hire recommended crew members who just happened to have criminal ties. What made this web so hard to unravel was its subtlety. To the casual observer, it was just another glittering night in Hollywood. But to those paying attention, it was clear. The mob wasn't just using Hollywood's glamour, they were becoming part of it, embedding themselves into its bloodstream. The true genius of the Hollywood casino scam wasn't in the glamour, it was in the paperwork. On the surface, each casino night was hosted by a legitimate-sounding charity. Names like the Children's Arts Fund or the Veterans Benevolence Association were printed on glossy invitations, often alongside a celebrity co-host or an honorary chairman from the local political scene. These names gave the events credibility, but in many cases, the charity existed only on paper. The process was deceptively simple. The mob would create or co-opt a small non-profit, register it legally, and open a bank account in its name. Publicly, the charity's mission sounded noble, supporting the arts, aiding war widows, funding community theaters. Privately, the address listed for the charity often led to a P.O. box, a rented desk in an empty office suite, or even a lawyer's back room. Ticket sales, table fees, and donations flowed in fast on the night of the event. Celebrities encouraged attendees to spend big, with the promise that it was all for a good cause. But here's where the magic happened. The accounting was deliberately murky. Officially, the charity might report that only 50% of the funds made it to their cause, with the rest going to operating expenses like venue rental, entertainment costs, and promotional materials. In reality, those expenses were massively inflated or completely fabricated. Vendors hired for these events often had direct ties to organized crime. Catering companies, printing shops, security firms, many were mob-owned fronts. They'd bill the charity for exaggerated amounts, funneling most of the cash right back to the people running the scam. By the time anyone tried to follow the money, it had already been laundered clean through multiple legitimate businesses. Even more brazen were the phantom donations. On paper, high-profile individuals and businesses contributed enormous sums. In reality, these were often kickbacks disguised as charity contributions, exchanged for favors ranging from sweetheart studio contracts to city permits. These transactions helped the mob extend influence far beyond the casino floor. The brilliance of the setup was its plausible deniability. If investigators questioned the organizers, they could produce receipts, bank statements, and a neatly filed set of records showing that everything was above board. Unless someone was willing to dig deep, and risk crossing some very dangerous people, the truth stayed buried. And as the money flowed, so did the mob's power. Hollywood's most exclusive parties had unknowingly become the city's most efficient money-laundering machines. But eventually, a crack began to form in the facade, one that would lead to whispers, suspicions, and the first signs of trouble for the empire they'd built. For years, the Hollywood casino scam ran like clockwork, until one man decided he'd had enough. His name was Little Frankie Marconi, a mid-level accountant who'd been hired to keep the books for one of the more glamorous charity foundations. At first, he thought he'd landed the job of a lifetime, mingling with movie stars, getting comped at high-end clubs, and being paid handsomely for what seemed like simple accounting work. But Frankie wasn't your average pencil pusher. He had a habit of double-checking everything, and the numbers just didn't add up. Receipts didn't match deposits. Checks from big-name donors were being split and rerouted to shell companies. Some vendors listed in the books didn't exist at all. The deeper he dug, the more it became clear. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. It was a full-scale laundering operation. Frankie might have stayed quiet if it wasn't for one night in 1959. He was delivering updated ledgers to his boss at a backroom meeting when he overheard two men, both known for their mob ties, casually discussing a problem they had with a stubborn reporter. The conversation wasn't just about silencing questions. It hinted at making sure the reporter never asked another one again. That's when Frankie realized the stakes weren't just financial. They were life and death. He started making copies of every incriminating document he could find, stashing them in a safe deposit box under a fake name. Then, in a risky move, he reached out to a trusted contact at a local newspaper. But before the reporter could even meet with him, word got out. Someone inside the foundation must have tipped off the wrong people, because Frankie suddenly became a marked man. Friends noticed strangers following him home. His phone line began to click and buzz, classic signs of a wiretap in those days. One night, his car was found parked near Griffith Park, keys still in the ignition, but Frankie was gone. No one ever saw him again. Some said he skipped town and started a new life under an alias. Others whispered that he'd been taken for a ride and buried somewhere out in the desert. The papers never ran his story. The safe deposit box? It vanished. Contents emptied before the bank could open it for investigators. Without Frankie, the trail went cold. But his sudden disappearance sent ripples of paranoia through the scam's organizers. If one man could get that close to exposing them, who might be next? It was the first real sign that the Hollywood casino empire wasn't untouchable. And soon, cracks in their carefully crafted illusion would start to widen. The turning point came in 1961, when a charity gala at one of the most respected Hollywood casino venues spiraled into a media nightmare. On the surface, it was the perfect blend of glamour and goodwill. Champagne fountains, orchestras playing under glittering chandeliers, and a guest list that read like a who's who of the silver screen. But behind the curtain, the mob's laundering machine was working overtime. The gala's proceeds, supposedly for a children's hospital, were already earmarked for offshore accounts before the first toast was even made. It might have gone unnoticed if it weren't for the evening's guest of honor, one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, a beloved actor known for wholesome family roles. That night, an overeager photographer, hired to cover the charity for a magazine, snapped a series of candid backstage shots. Among them was an image that would ignite a scandal, the actor laughing and clinking glasses with two men known to the LAPD as high-ranking mob figures. The photograph was harmless to the untrained eye, but to insiders, and later to investigative journalists, it screamed trouble. Within days, the image was leaked to a tabloid. The headline read, "America's favorite star in bed with the mob?" The actor's publicist scrambled to spin the story, claiming he had no idea who the men were and had simply been caught in an unfortunate photo op. But the damage was done. Reporters began digging, and soon they uncovered that the star had attended not just one, but several of the mob-backed charity events over the years. Even worse, some of the star's closest business associates were quietly tied to the same offshore accounts that kept the laundering scheme alive. The scandal sparked a feeding frenzy. Late-night hosts joked about the gambling do-gooders, while rival studios whispered about pulling the star from upcoming projects. Politicians, sensing opportunity, started calling for an investigation into the exploitation of charitable causes for criminal gain. But here's the thing, those calls for justice went nowhere fast. Key witnesses suddenly changed their stories or refused to testify. Documents went missing from government offices, and just when the scandal seemed ready to explode into a full-blown federal case, it fizzled out, buried under a wave of lack of evidence claims. Still, the damage to the casino scam's pristine image was irreversible. Hollywood's elite were suddenly more cautious about which events they attended, and the mob-backed charities found it harder to book big-name stars without drawing suspicion. Behind closed doors, mob bosses weren't angry. They were panicked. They knew that once the public started connecting Hollywood's glitter to organized crime's grit, the entire house of cards could collapse. The question was no longer if they'd be exposed, but when. By the early 1960s, whispers about the charity casino racket had reached the ears of Washington. The feds had long known that Hollywood and organized crime occasionally brushed shoulders, but the scale of this operation and the brazen use of celebrity endorsements made it impossible to ignore. The Justice Department quietly assembled a task force made up of FBI agents, IRS investigators, and a few trusted state officials. Their mission: follow the money without tipping off the mob or its high-profile Hollywood allies. On paper, they were targeting charitable fraud, but everyone involved knew this was really about cutting off one of organized crime's most lucrative pipelines. The plan was as ambitious as it was dangerous. Agents posed as wealthy donors, small-time investors, even casino staff to gain access to the inner workings of the events. They attended glittering galas in tuxedos and gowns, snapping hidden photographs, collecting coded receipts, and listening for slip-ups in hushed conversations over expensive cigars. One agent, working undercover as a high roller, managed to infiltrate a backroom meeting during a major Las Vegas Hollywood fundraiser. What he witnessed was jaw-dropping, suitcases of cash being counted in plain sight, with mob lieutenants casually dividing it into piles, one for the charity, one for the entertainers, and a much larger one destined for offshore accounts in the Bahamas. Sitting at the head of the table, a man known only by his nickname, the Banker, who controlled both the casino and the fake foundation's books. The feds gathered mountains of evidence over the course of months: bank transfers, wiretap recordings, even photographs of stars unknowingly shaking hands with mob figures while signing oversized donation checks for the cameras. It was enough to bring the whole operation down, or at least it should have been. When the sting finally moved to arrests, something went terribly wrong. Key warrants were delayed by a clerical error, giving suspects just enough time to disappear. Confidential informants who had been feeding information to the task force suddenly vanished, some fleeing the country entirely. Evidence that had been secured in locked cabinets was found missing or misfiled. The most frustrating blow came when a federal judge, one with a history of ruling in favor of certain mob-connected businessmen, threw out several critical pieces of evidence on procedural grounds. Without those, the case collapsed. To the public, the sting operation was never even mentioned. Newspapers ran only a few vague lines about inconclusive investigations into charity finances. Behind closed doors, the agents involved were furious. They knew they had been just days away from pulling off one of the most significant busts in Hollywood history. Instead, the scam rolled on, quieter than before, but still alive. But the mob had been rattled. The failed sting proved that law enforcement was watching, and it forced the operation into an even deeper level of secrecy. The days of openly flaunting celebrity endorsements were over, but the money kept moving, and the public kept believing. By the mid-1960s, the charity casino empire had run its course. The growing suspicion from law enforcement, the close call with the federal sting, and whispers within Hollywood's inner circles meant the operation was no longer the untouchable money machine it had once been. The mob's solution? Pull out fast, cash in big, and leave nothing behind that could tie them to the scam. This exit strategy was executed with the same precision and ruthlessness that had built the empire in the first place. Over a period of just a few months, the mob orchestrated a series of high-profile farewell events. These were advertised as the final charity galas, billed with over-the-top promises of record-breaking donations and special performances from A-list entertainers. Tickets sold out instantly, not just for the cause, but because everyone wanted to be part of what was marketed as the last golden age of Hollywood's charity nights. Behind the scenes, these final events were a massive cash grab. Casinos suddenly started offering private tables for premium donors, where bets were made in cash only. No checks, no receipts, no paper trail. Backroom vaults were emptied under the guise of transferring funds to offshore charities. But in reality, they were being funneled into a labyrinth of shell corporations in Panama, Switzerland, and Hong Kong. Even the celebrities who had been the public face of the operation began distancing themselves. Some claimed scheduling conflicts, others blamed creative differences with the event organizers. In truth, many had caught wind of the mounting investigations and wanted no part in the fallout. A few even received anonymous phone calls warning them to stay quiet and stay away if they valued their careers and their safety. The final gala, held in Las Vegas, was a masterclass in misdirection. On stage, a parade of movie stars tearfully spoke about the noble work of the charity. In the audience, federal agents sat in tuxedos, scanning for suspicious activity. But by the time the event ended, the real action had already happened hours earlier. Truckloads of cash had been moved under police escort, except the police were off-duty officers paid under the table to ensure the money reached the mob's hands without interference. By dawn, the funds had been wired across multiple countries, broken into smaller transfers so they would vanish into the banking system without raising alarms. And then, almost overnight, the entire operation disappeared. The casinos changed ownership. The charity foundations dissolved, their offices shuttered. Records were accidentally destroyed in a fire, and the staff, many of whom had been mob plants, either retired quietly or relocated overseas. For the city that had hosted these glamorous events for years, the disappearance was baffling. One day, it was the crown jewel of social life. The next, it was gone. No announcements, no explanations. The newspapers moved on quickly, reporting on the latest Hollywood scandal, and the public forgot. But in certain circles, the truth was clear. The mob had executed one of the cleanest exits in criminal history, walking away with millions and leaving almost no trace. And for those who had been close enough to see it all happen, there was an unspoken understanding. Asking too many questions was a good way to end up as just another unsolved mystery in the city's dark history. Long after the last roll of the dice and the final champagne toast, the story of Hollywood's charity casino scam became something whispered about rather than written down. Publicly, it was erased from history. No one wanted to admit that some of the most glamorous names in entertainment had been tied, however loosely, to one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations in American history. But privately, the legacy never died. For one, the scam fundamentally changed the way the mob viewed Hollywood. They had always seen the film industry as a useful tool, good for influence, publicity, and the occasional money wash through production budgets. But the charity casino operation proved something else entirely. That celebrities were more than just pawns for publicity. They were shields. The presence of a beloved movie star could make even the most skeptical law enforcement official think twice before poking around too hard. That lesson stayed with organized crime for decades, shaping how they would infiltrate legitimate businesses and entertainment circles going forward. Even more chilling was the realization that much of the stolen money never truly left Hollywood's orbit. While large sums were hidden overseas, plenty of it flowed right back into the city through quiet investments, real estate purchases, nightclub ownership, even funding for certain film productions. These moves blurred the line between dirty money and legitimate financing, making it almost impossible to untangle the two. Some historians believe that a handful of classic films from the late 1960s and early 1970s were, in part, funded with these laundered casino profits. Why, then, isn't this common knowledge today? The answer is twofold: fear and complicity. Many of the people who could have spoken out, casino employees, mid-level mob associates, even former celebrities, either died without telling their stories or chose silence to protect themselves and their families. Others were incentivized to keep quiet through quiet payouts, business opportunities, or the simple knowledge that the wrong conversation could have deadly consequences. And then there's the uncomfortable truth. Some of the city's most powerful figures, from studio heads to local politicians, benefited from the scam, whether they knew it or not. To publicly expose the full truth would have meant unraveling reputations, destroying careers, and perhaps revealing that respectable Hollywood wasn't as clean as it claimed to be. Every so often, pieces of the puzzle resurface: a declassified FBI memo, a forgotten newspaper clipping, a memoir from someone who claims to have been there. But these fragments are quickly dismissed as rumors, too old or too thin to prove. For the mob, that's the perfect ending. No courtroom drama, no headlines screaming about scandal, just a slow fade to black as the city moves on and the truth becomes another ghost story told in the back corners of dimly lit bars. And for Hollywood, it's a reminder of the bargain it has always struck with its darker side. So long as the lights keep flashing and the cameras keep rolling, the past can stay buried. But beneath the glitter and gold, the shadow of that casino scam still lingers, an untold chapter in the city's history that might never fully come to light.